G'day, welcome to the Paul Wallis channel. In these short stories of origins, I'm going to be looking at some mysterious stories from the present day, anomalous stories in our news, and asking the question of how they relate to what our world mythologies and ancestral narratives had to say. Does what we are experiencing today relate in any way to what our ancestors had to tell us? And please jump into the comments. I'd love to have a conversation with you and know what you think about these fascinating topics that we're covering. And in today's story, we're looking at the topic of a famous Australian cryptid. At the beginning of the 21st century, I relocated from the UK to the beautiful island continent of Australia. And what a beautiful part of the world it is. I absolutely love being an Australian and living in Australia. But one of the things that fascinated me from the get-go was the lack of Australian megafauna. In Africa, you've got elephants, hippos, rhinos, wildebeest, giraffe. Go to India, you've got elephants, you've got apes, you've got tigers, you've got lions in Africa as well, of course. Where are the equivalent creatures here in Australia? Where are the megafauna that you would expect to see at the top of the food chain? And it left me asking the question, what happened here that there should be that gap in the ecological system? Seen from another angle, Australia's ecological system is very, very stable. So much so that there has been a continuous human occupation of Australia for tens of thousands of years, before and after the last ice ages. And scholars today believe that the human presence here in Australia goes back fully more than 60,000 years. And when we listen to the stories of that culture, Aboriginal Australians speak of another continuous presence, a kind of animal that has never been captured, never been caught on camera, and yet thousands of people around Australia say they have encountered them. A lone female driver was driving through Bongal Bongal National Park. She had her dog in the car with her, and the first thing she noticed was that her dog was becoming very anxious and agitated and had jumped into the footwell of the passenger seat and was cowering down there looking very anxious. And then she noticed this very strange acrid smell. And this is often reported around Yowie encounters. People describe it as electric burning baker-like kind of smell. Others describe it as a very acrid sulfuric kind of smell, a smell that really catches you at the back of the throat. Well, she noticed that, and it was then that she began to feel a bit uneasy. Then she realized that something was running in parallel with her car behind the tree line. Now, she's on a highway, and the tree line is some meters from the road. And as she continues, she realizes this creature is keeping pace with her car, and she's going about 80 kilometers an hour, which is around 50 miles an hour. As she continues down the road, the tree line is actually approaching the road, and she can see that the pathway the creature is following is going to cross the road, and she's likely to see it jump in front. But before that happens, she realizes the creature is right next to her car, and she can see this russet hair of some kind of animal. And at first she thought, is this some kind of bear running at 50 miles an hour down the road with me? Well, it continued for some while. She sped up, as you would, to about 95 kilometers an hour. And it was at that point that the creature leapt in front of her vehicle and began running on 2 feet. Faster than her vehicle, which is now going 95 kilometers an hour. As it stood up, she saw it was an incredibly tall and athletic being, what we call a Yowie. If you can picture Chewbacca from Star Wars, you're roughly picturing a Yowie. They are often described as being that size, around 8 feet to 14 feet tall, hairy, with hair that is a russet brown or black color, a slightly conical looking head, long arms and very little neck that's visible, and very, very strong and fast creatures. Bill O'Chee is a retired senator here in Australia, and when he was at school, he went on a camp in Queensland and as a group of students and teachers experienced a close encounter with a Yowie, interacting with it in an encounter that continued for more than half an hour. How do we handle witness testimony like that? Does the credibility of the report lessen because of the hearer's worldview? Physical evidence that Australians do cite is finding young trees that have been broken off, just snapped, about 8 feet to 3 meters above ground level. And there's no evidence of another tree having fallen on top of it. Well, what could do that? A human being couldn't break a young tree in that way. What could break a tree at that height? And so people report things like that. They report finding nests of some large creature, much like the nests that gorillas make. Preludes to physical encounters include the sound of rocks being smashed together as some kind of a signal. Often you can hear the stomping through the bush. These are often the preludes to an actual face-to-face encounter. But is it possible that a creature of such a size could remain undiscovered? Well, it's worth pointing out that around 40% of Australia remains untouched and unexplored. That's an area about the size of India. Another reason this fascinates me is, how does this relate to our ancestral stories of beginnings? If we go to Mesoamerica, to the Mayan account as recorded in the Guatemalan story, the Popol Vuh, there our ancient ancestors tell us that the human race began as the result of a series of experiments in genetic engineering. And so says the Popol Vuh, those experiments resulted in us plus a few ape-like creatures that live in the forest. That's what it says, and that's a very intriguing phrase. A few ape-like creatures that live in the forest. First of all, it's interesting because it relates us, Homo sapiens, to apes. Not that we're descended from apes, but that we and apes have a common ancestor, a common primate ancestor, and that we both resulted from that experimentation of ET engineers from elsewhere. But the phrase is intriguing for another reason. Does it mean a few creatures or a few species? And when it says ape-like creatures, does it mean ape kind, or does it mean something like an ape? Let me know what you think. Do you think it's possible that somewhere in the 40% of unexplored Australia is a cryptid as large as a gorilla, undiscovered, unphotographed, uncaptured in Australia? Could it be living in small groups out in the 40% of Australia that's untouched and unexplored? Or is the lack of physical evidence just too much to overcome? Is it genuinely a cryptid or a made-up story? No photographs, no artifacts, no bits of hair. How do we respond to a story like that? And then where does that put the witness testimony? Let me know what you think. Jump into the comments. We'll get into a conversation and watch this space, because in a little while I'll do a longer documentary on this topic on the Fifth Kind TV. See you there. See you at fifthkind.tv. Keep an eye out for the Scars of Eden, and I'll see you next time.